When my brother Jake and his two daughters, Lily and Sophia, moved into our home, I thought it would be a short-term arrangement. Jake had just lost his house after a series of financial setbacks, and while his pride took a hit, I wanted to be supportive. After all, family helps family, right? At first, it seemed manageable. My husband, Eric, and I set up a cozy space for them in the guest rooms, and my 16-year-old daughter, Emma, even agreed to share some of her closet space. The girls, Lily, 14, and Sophia, 12, were polite, albeit a little shy, and Jake was doing his best to get back on his feet. For the first month or so, the arrangement felt like a new, slightly crowded normal. But the cracks started showing quickly. Emma came to me one evening, frustrated that her favorite hoodie was missing. It turned out Lily had borrowed it without asking. I brushed it off, chalking it up to normal teenage behavior, but it didn't stop there. Makeup, books, even a pair of Emma's sneakers began disappearing. Each time, I would gently remind Jake to speak with his daughters, and he would assure me he would handle it. What frustrated me most wasn't the missing items. It was Jake's dismissive attitude. "They're just kids," he'd say. "Emma's the oldest. She can set an example by sharing." This didn't sit well with Emma, who had never been close to her cousins. She started locking her bedroom door whenever she wasn't inside, which Jake found unwelcoming. The real turning point came when Emma's school laptop went missing. She was frantic, not just because of the missing device, but because it had all her assignments and notes. We turned the house upside down looking for it. When I finally found it tucked under Lily's bed, I confronted Jake. Instead of an apology, he shrugged. "They're kids," he repeated. "Emma should have kept it somewhere safer." This conversation was the first time I felt true resentment. How is this our fault? We were the ones offering him a roof over his head, yet my daughter was being made to feel like a guest in her own home. Eric tried to play peacemaker, suggesting we set firmer boundaries, but Jake brushed it off, claiming we were overreacting. Things escalated one Saturday afternoon when Sophia found Emma's makeup kit, the one she'd been saving for months to buy, and decided to experiment with it. By the time Emma discovered what had happened, the kit was a mess. Emma was in tears, and I was livid. I expected Jake to discipline Sophia, but instead, he just laughed it off. "Girls will be girls," he said, as if that excused his daughter's actions. I sat down with Eric that night and told him I was done letting this slide. We couldn't keep allowing Jake to bulldoze through our boundaries. Eric agreed, but we both knew standing up to Jake would create a storm. After the makeup fiasco, I decided to take action. Emma was heartbroken, and I wasn't about to let my brother's dismissive parenting turn our home into a war zone. The next day, I bought a lock for Emma's bedroom door. She was hesitant at first, worried it would make things worse, but I reassured her. "You have every right to protect your space and your things," I told her. Jake, however, didn't see it that way. The lock was installed by the end of the day, and the reaction was immediate. When Lily and Sophia realized they could no longer waltz into Emma's room, they went straight to their dad. Jake stormed into the kitchen that evening, fuming. "What's this about locking doors in my own family's house?" he demanded. "Jake," I replied as calmly as I could, "this is our house, and Emma has every right to feel safe here. She's been more than patient, but this is the last straw. The lock stays." He scoffed, shaking his head like I'd just insulted him. "You're teaching her to be selfish. We're family, for crying out loud. Family doesn't lock each other out. Family also doesn't steal or disrespect boundaries," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. The argument escalated quickly. Jake accused me of turning Emma against her cousins, while I reminded him that he hadn't held his daughters accountable for any of their actions. Eric, always the mediator, tried to diffuse the tension, but Jake wasn't having it. He stormed off, slamming his bedroom door so hard it rattled the windows. That night, the tension in the house was unbearable. Lily and Sophia glared at Emma during dinner, whispering loudly enough for her to hear. Jake barely said a word, and Eric and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what the next move should be. The next morning, things took a bizarre turn. I found Lily sitting outside Emma's locked door, muttering about how unfair it was. When I asked her what she was doing, she burst into tears, accusing Emma of treating them like strangers. I just wanted to borrow her curling iron, Lily sobbed. It's not like I was going to keep it. It's not about the curling iron, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about respecting someone's space. Emma deserves that, and you need to start understanding it. Jake, overhearing the conversation, joined in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, so now my kids are the villains? Nice parenting, sis. Really stellar example you're setting here. I'd had enough. Jake, this isn't about painting anyone as a villain. It's about teaching your daughters accountability. You've refused to address this, so I had to. The situation spiraled further that afternoon when Jake called a family meeting without consulting me or Eric. He gathered everyone in the living room, his arms crossed and his expression grim. Let's get something straight, he began, his voice filled with indignation. This house is supposed to be a safe space for everyone. But lately, it's been anything but. My daughters feel unwelcome, and that's not okay. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not wanting to be dragged into another confrontation. Dad, she whispered to Eric, do I have to sit here for this? Eric shook his head. Emma, go to your room. You don't need to be part of this. The moment Emma left, Jake pounced. See? You're coddling her. No wonder she's so entitled. Eric, usually the calm one, finally snapped. Jake, enough. You've been pushing everyone's boundaries since you moved in. We offered you a place to stay because we care, but this isn't working. Something has to change. Jake looked genuinely shocked, as if the thought of him being in the wrong had never crossed his mind. Fine, he spat. If you don't want us here, just say so. This isn't about us wanting you gone, I said, my voice firm but even. It's about you taking responsibility. If you're willing to work with us, we can make this work. But if not, we need to talk about a timeline for you to find another place. Jake didn't respond. He just stood there, glaring at me before turning and walking out of the room. The days following the family meeting were tense, to say the least. Jake had gone into full sulk mode, barely speaking to anyone and retreating to his room whenever he wasn't at work. Meanwhile, his daughters were a constant presence, their passive-aggressive remarks becoming more blatant by the day. Emma, to her credit, tried to stay out of the way. She spent most of her time in her room, only emerging for meals or schoolwork. But I could tell the situation was wearing on her. One night, she came to me with tears in her eyes. Mom, she said, her voice trembling, I hate living like this. I feel like I'm being punished for wanting my own space. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hugged her tightly, vowing to fix things, no matter how uncomfortable it got. The next day, Eric and I sat down to have a private talk about what to do next. It was clear that the current arrangement wasn't sustainable. We've given Jake time to adjust, Eric said, his tone measured. But he's not trying to meet us halfway. If anything, he's making things worse. I know, I agreed, running a hand through my hair. But what do we do? Kick him out? He's my brother. I don't want to abandon him when he's struggling. Eric sighed. We're not abandoning him, but we have to set boundaries, for Emma's sake. If he can't respect that, he has to leave. That afternoon, I approached Jake while he was sitting on the back porch, staring at his phone. He looked up as I walked over, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, I began, sitting down across from him. He didn't respond, just raised an eyebrow like he was bracing for another lecture. Jake, I love you, and I've tried to make this work. But things can't keep going the way they are. You and the girls need to start respecting Emma's boundaries. If you can't, we'll have to figure out another living arrangement. His face darkened. So, that's it? You're kicking us out? No, I said firmly. I'm giving you a choice. Work with us to create a better environment, or start planning to move out. I can't let this continue to hurt Emma. Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the deck. You think you're better than me, don't you? Just because your life is perfect and mine's a mess. This isn't about being better, I shot back, my frustration boiling over. This is about respect. Emma deserves to feel safe in her own home, and right now, she doesn't. Jake stormed off without another word, slamming the back door behind him. The fallout was immediate. Jake started avoiding us entirely, eating meals in his room, and ignoring any attempts to talk. Lily and Sophia, emboldened by their dad's behavior, began testing the limits of the lock on Emma's door. One evening, I caught Lily trying to pick the lock with a hairpin. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Lily jumped, dropping the hairpin and stammering, I just needed something from Emma's room." "Her room is off limits," I said firmly, picking up the hairpin. "This behavior stops now, Lily." "I mean it." She ran off in tears, and I could hear her telling Jake about the mean way I'd spoken to her. Jake, of course, took her side, accusing me of bullying his daughters. Eric stepped in at that point, his patience finally at its limit. "Jake, enough," he said, his voice cold. "You're a guest here, not the head of this household. If you can't respect our rules, you need to leave. Period." Jake stared at Eric like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. For a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead, he just nodded curtly and walked away. A few days later, Jake announced that he'd found a place to stay. "We'll be out by the end of the week," he said, his tone icy. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I didn't want things to end like this, but I couldn't deny that the house had become unbearable. When moving day came, Jake barely said goodbye. Lily and Sophia left without a word to Emma, who watched from her bedroom window as they drove away. The house was quiet that evening, almost eerily so. But for the first time in months, it felt peaceful. Emma seemed lighter, her smile coming more easily. "I'm proud of you," Eric said as we sat together on the couch that night. "You did what was best for Emma, even though it wasn't easy." I nodded, though a part of me still felt conflicted. Jake was my brother, and I hated that things had ended on such bad terms. But I knew we'd made the right choice. Now, the challenge was figuring out how to rebuild the relationship with Jake and his daughters. But for now, I was content to focus on my family and the peace we'd worked so hard to reclaim. After Jake moved out, the quiet in the house was almost unsettling. It was like walking through a battlefield after the dust had settled. For the first few days, Emma kept to herself, as if she didn't trust that the peace would last. I caught her cautiously testing the lock on her door, like she was afraid someone might still try to invade her space. "Emma," I said gently one evening as she sat on her bed sketching in her notebook, "how are you feeling now that things have settled down?" She looked up, her face a mix of relief and hesitation. "Better," she admitted. "It's just weird. I keep thinking they're going to come back, and everything will start all over again." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I realized how much the situation had impacted her. It wasn't just about a stolen laptop or makeup. It was the constant stress of having her boundaries disrespected, of feeling like her voice didn't matter. "You're safe now," I assured her. "This is your home, and no one is going to take that away from you." She nodded, giving me a small smile. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you stood up for me." Hearing her say that felt like a balm for all the guilt I'd been carrying. But I knew the battle wasn't entirely over. Jake's departure hadn't come without consequences. Word spread quickly through the family, and as expected, opinions were divided. My parents, always eager to avoid conflict, called me shortly after Jake moved out. "Couldn't you have worked something out?" my mom asked, her tone more accusatory than concerned. "Jake's been through so much, and you just kicked him out?" "I didn't kick him out, Mom," I said, trying to stay calm. "I gave him a choice: respect our boundaries or find another place. He chose to leave." "Well, it sounds like you didn't try very hard to help," she countered. "What kind of sister lets her brother end up in a situation like this?" It took everything in me not to lose my temper. What kind of brother moves into someone's house and lets his kids run roughshod over their cousins? I shot back. "Emma was miserable, Mom. She deserves to feel safe in her own home. I'm sorry if you don't agree, but I did what I had to do." The conversation ended with a strained silence, and I knew I wouldn't be getting much support from that corner of the family. Meanwhile, Jake kept his distance. Weeks passed without a word from him. I didn't expect him to call or apologize, but it still stung. No matter how justified I felt, he was still my brother, and I hated that things had ended so bitterly. It wasn't until Emma's birthday that I heard from him again. He texted me the morning of the party. Can I bring the girls by to drop off a gift for Emma? Just a quick visit, I promise. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. A part of me wanted to say no, to protect Emma from any potential drama. But another part of me wanted to give Jake a chance, even if it was just for Emma's sake. After some deliberation, I texted back, "Okay, but keep it brief. I don't want any tension today." Jake showed up that afternoon with Lily and Sophia in tow. They looked awkward and out of place, standing in our living room like they were waiting for a cue. Jake handed Emma a small, neatly wrapped package. "Happy birthday, Emma," he said, his voice subdued. Emma hesitated for a moment before taking the gift. "Thanks, Uncle Jake." She opened it carefully, revealing a sketch pad and a set of high-quality pencils. Her eyes lit up, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the old Emma, the one who wasn't weighed down by months of tension and resentment. "These are great," she said softly. "Thank you." Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was a brief moment of connection, but it felt significant. After the party, Jake stayed back to talk. "Look," he began, rubbing the back of his neck, "I know I wasn't the best houseguest. I didn't handle things well, and I'm sorry for how it all went down." I crossed my arms, unsure whether to accept the apology outright. "It wasn't just about you, Jake. It was about Emma. She was miserable, and I couldn't let that continue." "I get that now," he admitted. "And I'm trying to do better for myself and the girls. We've started therapy. I want them to understand boundaries and respect, and I know I need to set a better example." His words caught me off guard. Jake wasn't one to admit fault easily, let alone take steps to change. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I appreciate that," I said, my tone softening. "It's going to take time, but I'm willing to work on repairing things if you are." Jake nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we shared a genuine moment of understanding. Over the next few months, things slowly improved. Jake and I started communicating more, though cautiously at first. He made an effort to rebuild his relationship with Emma, and I could see her gradually warming up to him again. The experience had been a difficult one, but it taught me the importance of standing firm for my family, even when it meant making hard decisions. It also reminded me that people are capable of change if they're willing to put in the effort. Looking back, I don't regret the choices I made. Protecting Emma was my priority, and I'm proud of the example I set for her. But I'm also grateful for the chance to mend bridges with Jake and his daughters. Because at the end of the day, family is messy, complicated, and sometimes infuriating, but it's also worth fighting for. Months later, as I watched Emma sketch peacefully in her room, a thought struck me. This battle wasn't just about locks or laptops. It was about teaching her that her voice mattered, that her boundaries deserved respect, even when others didn't understand. Jake and I were slowly mending our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences and lingering resentment, but the effort was there. He was making strides with Lily and Sophia, and though it would take time, I could see glimpses of the brother I used to know. But what truly moved me was Emma. She had blossomed in the months since Jake left. Her confidence grew, her laughter returned, and her drawings filled the house with life. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. One evening, she came to me holding her sketchbook. "Mom, I want you to see this," she said, flipping to a page. It was a drawing of our family, not perfect, not without flaws, but together. There was Jake, Lily, Sophia, and us, all standing under a big, crooked heart. "I know it was hard," she said, her voice steady, "but I'm glad you did what you did. You made me feel safe when no one else did. And I think Uncle Jake is starting to understand that too." I hugged her tightly, tears stinging my eyes. "You're my priority, Emma. Always." That moment solidified everything for me. Life would never be free of challenges, and family would always come with its share of chaos. But through it all, the love and respect we fought for were worth every difficult decision. As I looked at the sketch, I realized something. Broken things can be mended, but only when everyone is willing to pick up the pieces. And this time, we all were.